Why do we feel that certain things are right and others are clearly wrong, even without anyone teaching us? Think about this for a moment. Have you ever seen someone mistreat an animal on the street? A dog being kicked for no reason, just because it crossed the path of someone in a bad mood? Or have you witnessed someone deceiving an elderly person, taking advantage, lying to get money from them? You felt something inside you, didn't you? A kind of a revolt that didn't come from outside, but from within. A visceral feeling that it was unjust, unacceptable, wrong. Now, stop and think. Who taught you this? Who told you in some invisible manual of life that these attitudes are wrong? At what point in your childhood did someone give you a handwritten list of good and bad behaviors? Exactly. Maybe no one told you directly, but even so, you knew. This is the question that C.S. Lewis, one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century, could not ignore. On the contrary, it was exactly this unease that led him to write one of the most impactful works on faith, morality, and existence, Mere Christianity. For Lewis, this moral perception we carry, this sense of right and wrong, is much more than a social instinct or a cultural convention. He believed that inside every human being there is a kind of invisible compass, a silent moral law that points to something greater, something real, something eternal. What if I told you that this invisible compass not only guides our decisions, but also reveals a profound truth about the universe and about ourselves? Stay with me until the end, because what you are about to discover might surprise you, and perhaps change the way you see the reality around you. C.S. Lewis was not trying to prove the existence of God with complicated formulas or cold arguments. He started with something simple, something human. He started with what we all feel, that little inner voice that whispers and sometimes shouts when we are faced with an injustice. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever felt that you needed to do what was right, even when no one was looking, even when no one would judge you, even when it would be easier to just ignore and move on? Well then, that is exactly where the mystery lies, and at the same time, the key. This moral law, as C.S. Lewis called it, is not a religious invention, nor an imposition of society. It is in you, just as it is in me, and in all human beings, regardless of culture, era, or religion. Of course, customs change, traditions vary, but certain truths remain. Anywhere in the world, deliberately deceiving someone will be seen as wrong. Betraying a friend's trust is something painful, no matter if you live in an African village, an Asian metropolis, or in the interior of Brazil. It's as if we all already have this moral conscience installed before we even know how to read or write.
And the most impressive thing? Even when we make a mistake, even when we justify our own errors, we still feel the need to justify, to explain, to say that it wasn't really like that. Because deep down, we know. We know that there is a right and a wrong. And this conscience does not depend on personal opinion. And here comes the deepest and also most provocative part of Lewis's thought. If this moral law exists, it must have come from somewhere, or rather, from someone. After all, laws don't just appear out of nowhere. Rules presuppose legislator. Compasses point to a true north. Lewis argued that the presence of this universal morality within us is one of the clearest evidences for the existence of God. Not just any God, but a God who cares about good and evil, who desires justice, who created us with the ability to distinguish between what destroys and what builds up. Maybe you have thought that you don't believe in God because the world is full of pain, injustice, wars. But notice, how do you know these things are wrong? Based on what? Lewis said that for someone to say the world is unjust, they must know what justice is. But if there is no absolute standard of justice, then the word loses its meaning. If everything is just relative, if everything depends on each person's opinion, then nothing can really be considered evil. But we know some things are. We know, for example, that betraying our friend is wrong, that humiliating someone is cruel, that taking the life of an innocent person is unjust. And this certainty, which is born quietly within us, points to something that goes beyond biology, culture, or evolution. It points to an author. You can doubt many things, but to doubt your own moral conscience is almost impossible. How many times have you found yourself in internal conflict? How many times have you done something you knew you shouldn't and then felt bad? Or how many times have you felt compelled to do good even when it meant giving up something of your own? This is tension between what we want to do and what we should do is one of the most human marks of existence. And that is exactly where the moral law operates. It does not oblige, but it guides. It does not impose, but it convinces. It is not visible, but it is always present. And that's why it bothers us so much. C.S. Lewis said that if we were just products of chance, if the universe had no purpose, if we were just matter reacting to stimuli, then we shouldn't care about good or evil. We should just survive. But the human being wants more than to survive. He wants to live with meaning. He wants justice. He wants purpose. And the simple fact that we want these things already says a lot about who we are, and even more about who created us.
Lewis was not saying that everyone is good. On the contrary, he believed that this same moral law that shows us the way also reveals how much we have strayed from it. That is why he said that the first step to getting closer to God is to recognize one's own failure, to admit that even knowing what is right, we often choose what is wrong, not because we are ignorant, but because we are human. And that's where the beauty of the Christianity that Lewis so defended comes in. The recognition of failure is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of it. The moral law is not just there to accuse us. It is there to awaken us. It's like an echo from heaven, drawing our attention to a truth that transcends this world. Therefore, when you feel that pang in your chest, when you see an injustice, don't ignore it. When you're tempted to do wrong, but something inside you says, don't do that, listen. When you realize you're straying from what you believe is right, turn back. Because maybe, just maybe, that whisper from your conscience is the voice of a God who has not given up on reminding you who you are and where you're going. And this is where the journey really begins. Because now that you understand that this moral law exists within you and that it points to something greater, maybe it's time to discover what this law truly wants to reveal to you. Maybe it's time to dive deeper, to explore not just the idea of right and wrong, but the origin of it all. Because, deep down, the question that echoes behind all this conversation is simple, and at the same time breathtaking. If there is a morality imprinted on the human soul, then who wrote it? Stay with me, because what comes next might transform the way you see your faith and yourself.
Have you ever wondered why,
In practically every culture, stealing, lying, betraying, killing, mistreating the weak, and harming the innocent are seen as wrong. Even if the traditions, gods, and rituals are different around the world, certain principles seem non-negotiable. There is something common, something that crosses centuries and borders, a shared sense of right and wrong, of justice and injustice, of honor and betrayal. And what if I told you that inside you there is an invisible moral compass and that it points to something much more real than we imagine? C.S. Lewis called this the law of human nature, or the moral law. According to him, this law is not about gravity or physics or biology. It deals with what we ought to do, not what we actually do. A law that lives inside each of us and constantly reminds us that was right, or you shouldn't have done that. That same voice that bothers us when we are selfish, even if no one sees. That voice that doesn't keep silent when we failed someone, even if no one holds us accountable. Have you ever felt that? It's curious, because most people act as if this law exists, even if they have never read about it. When someone hurts you, you say, that's not fair. But where does this concept of justice come from? How do you know what is fair? Who determined that betrayal is wrong, that abandoning a child is wrong, that killing for pleasure is an aberration? Did we simply evolve with these concepts, or were warned with them because someone much greater than us planted them within us? Lewis believed that the existence of this universal moral law is one of the clearest signs of the existence of God. Because, you see, if it were all just a result of evolution, the instinct for survival should be stronger than the one for sacrifice, right? But then why do some people die to save strangers? Why do so many choose good even when it comes at a huge cost? Why do we feel guilty when we fail, even if no one knows? Have you ever been through this? Have you ever found yourself alone in your room after a mistake, with your soul in silence, but with your conscience breathing? This voice that no one sees, that no one hears, but that you feel, is one of the most mysterious realities of the human experience. Lewis did not see this as something symbolic, but as real evidence that an absolute good exists, a standard higher than our wills, a God who created us with a moral sense, because he himself is the standard of justice. So, pay attention. This does not mean that everyone lives in accordance with his law. Quite the opposite.
We know we should be honest, but we lie to protect ourselves. We want to be good, but we stumble every day. This contradiction, this internal war between what we know is right and what we actually do, was one of the bases of C.S. Lewis's reasoning. He said that this struggle is, in fact, the greatest sign that there is something greater than us. Because if there were no absolute standard, how could we judge our own behavior? How could we say that we are wrong if there were no clear line between right and wrong? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you. The idea that we are all born with a moral law inscribed in our conscience is not just philosophical or theological. It has profound implications for the way we see life, justice, suffering, and even God. Because if this law exists, then a legislator exists. If there is right and wrong, then there is a standard. And if there is a standard, then maybe everything we do, think, choose, and avoid is being measured by something much higher than our own opinions. But let's go deeper. Imagine for a moment that this moral law is indeed real. That it exists, is in you, is in me, and is in every human being. What does that change? It changes everything. Because if this law exists, then we are not alone in the universe. We are not just products of chance. We are creatures created by a creator who endowed us with consciousness, freedom, and responsibility. A creator who not only gave us a soul, but a sense of direction. And even more, a creator who knows that we fail, but who offers us redemption. Maybe you're hearing all this and thinking, but I failed so much. I do things I don't even understand. And that is exactly where this conversation gets even deeper. Because this moral law doesn't just serve to accuse us. It also serves to awaken us, to lead us to the truth, to lead us to God. C.S. Lewis understood this when he went from atheist to Christian. He didn't come to faith because he wanted consolation.
He came because he realized that his own moral convictions made no sense without God. He understood that the existence of this voice within him could only be explained if there was someone outside of him who had put it there, someone who is the source of justice, goodness, and truth. And if that is true, then living by ignoring this voice is like plugging our ears to someone trying to save us. Notice, we are not talking about religious rules here. We are not talking about dogmas or traditions. We're talking about something much more intimate, something you feel, even if you have never been to a church, something that touches you, even when you try to hide it, something that convinces you, even when you argue argument.
Morality is not an external imposition. It is a light that shines from within. And the more we try to stifle it, the more it insists on reminding us that we were made for something greater. Have you noticed this? Have you ever had that feeling that no matter how much you achieve, there is still an emptiness if you are far from what is right? Have you noticed that even the most successful people carry deep regrets? That even those who have everything still feel guilty? This feeling is the voice of the moral law. It does not want to condemn us. It wants to invite us to the truth, to restoration, to an encounter with our Creator. And maybe this is the time to listen more carefully. But if this moral law really exists, how does it operate in the modern world where everything seems relative and truth has become a matter of opinion? What happens when we ignore this internal compass? And how can this forgotten morality lead us back to the God who planted it inside us? And perhaps now you're thinking about all those times when something inside you just knew it was right, even when doing the right thing was costly, even when no one was looking, even when no one would ever know. That feeling, that tightness in your chest, that silent discomfort in the face of injustice, or that deep peace when acting with integrity, even in secret. All of this points to something greater. C.S. Lewis called it the moral law, and he believed it was much more than a cultural invention. It was for him evidence that a true good exists, a good that does not depend on our will, that doesn't change with time, a good that costs us even when we want to ignore it. And perhaps now you're thinking about all those times when something inside you just knew I was right, even when doing the right thing was costly, even when no one was looking, even when no one would ever know. That feeling, that tightness in your chest, that silent discomfort in the face of injustice, or that deep peace when acting with integrity, even in secret. All of this points to something greater. If this conversation is stirring something in you, if this type of content helps you to think, to reflect, to see life more clearly, like this video. This may seem small, but it's what helps us continue bringing this kind of message. And if you want to walk this journey with us, subscribe to the channel. There is a lot more coming, and it would be an honor to have you around, being a part of this. Your participation here is what makes this space exist. This channel is an invitation to think together, to reflect with depth, with sensitivity, with honesty. And the more people we reach, the more voices are added to this sincere search for something that transcends the immediate. Now, take a deep breath, because what comes next might surprise you even more. Lewis not only believed in this invisible compass, he also showed that when we ignore it, something inside us begins to die. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject because understanding what C.S. Lewis called the universal moral law is not just an intellectual exercise, it is an inner journey. It's like opening a window into ourselves and realizing that there is something there that has always been there. A silent code, a kind of persistent whisper which sometimes bothers, sometimes consoles, but never disappears.
Lewis argued that this moral law, this inner notion of right and wrong, is not a cultural invention. It was not created by social rules or shaped only by education. It is recognized in all civilizations, in all times, with external variations, but with a non-negotiable core. Have you ever noticed that? That even in distant cultures, separated by time and space, there is a mysterious agreement on some fundamental principles. No one applauds cowardice, no one exalts betrayal, no one is proud of deceiving. Of course, justifications appear later, but the discomfort, it is there. It appears, it exposes. C.S. Lewis explains this with a simple but impactful example. When you hear someone say, "That's not fair," you're not just hearing a complaint. You're hearing the evidence that this person believes in some kind of justice, even if they have never studied philosophy. And that is powerful because it reveals that we are not just reacting by instincts, we are responding to something deeper, to an embedded moral structure, as if in some way we were born with this map already printed on our soul. And this is where the question becomes inevitable. If this morality is in us, where did it come from? Maybe you have already observed a small child reacting with indignation to an injustice. No one needed to teach them that it was wrong. They simply knew. That scene touched something that already existed in them. Of course, the child will still learn many things throughout life, but that first impulse for justice, that sense that something is not right, is spontaneous. It is natural. It's almost as if it was there before the words. Lewis said that this was the echo of a voice that calls to us.
A voice that is not ours, but that speaks from within. This idea may seem poetic, and it is, but it also carries an irrefutable logic. If a moral law exists, then, by definition, a legislator exists. Every law points to a mind that conceives it. And if this law is universal, silent, internal, then this legislator must be greater than all cultures, greater than individuals, greater even than time. Lewis saw this a powerful argument for the existence of God. Not a generic or distant God, but a God who knows us intimately, who created us with this moral compass not by chance, but as a sign, a reminder, a call. And here the reflection becomes even deeper, because if this moral law exists, why do we fail so much to obey it? This is the dilemma. We know what we should do, and yet, so many times, we choose the opposite. Have you ever lived this? That feeling that you knew what was right, but you liked it differently. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of pride, maybe out of convenience. Lewis points out exactly this tension. The moral law is not applause for our morality. It is, in fact, an accusation, a reminder that we fail, that we are not who we should be. It is uncomfortable, but it is honest. Think, for example, of someone who preaches peace, who talks about forgiveness but loses control and screams at their own family. It's not out of malice. It's because there's something broken inside us. This inconsistency does not negate morality. On the contrary, it reinforces it, because it shows that we know what is right, but we cannot do it. And this points to our need for help, for transformation, for redemption. Lewis says that the faith enters here, not as an escape, not as an emotional crutch, as so many say, but as a real answer to this inner conflict. Morality shows us the way, but it doesn't give us the strength to walk it. Faith, yes. Faith in a God who not only created with moral law, but also loves us enough to help us live it. And this is a decisive point. Morality is not the end. It is the beginning. It is the beginning of a ladder that leads us back home, to God. Lewis argued that feeling the weight of the moral law is in fact feeling homesickness. Homesickness for a place where everything makes sense, where good is not difficult, where justice is complete.
And maybe you feel that too. Maybe that tightness in your chest, but discomfort with injustice, with lies, with the coldness of the world, is homesickness for heaven. But then the inevitable question arises. If this morality is so clear, why do we ignore it? The answer lies in the culture that surrounds us. We live in the era of everything is relative, of my truth, of freedom without limit. But this comes at a cost. When everything is relative, nothing is firm, nothing is secure, not love, not truth, not justice. The resolute,
A confused world where people feel lost even when surrounded by information. A world where feelings replace principles, where desire speaks louder than conscience. Lewis spoke of the men without chests, those who have lost the ability to be moved by what is noble, just, and beautiful, not because these things have ceased to exist, but because he has become numb. And that is dangerous, because a numb heart cannot hear the voice. And if we do not hear the voice, we will follow any noise, any trend, any impulse. But there is hope. There always is, because forgotten morality can be rediscovered. It does not disappear. It just falls silent, waiting to be heard again. And it all starts with a simple decision to stop, to listen, to look within, and to begin, even if little by little, to act in accordance with that inner voice, to seek the truth, to choose integrity, to treat others with dignity, even when no one is watching. These small steps are in fact giant leaps because they mark the beginning of a new journey. Lewis invites us to see morality not as a burden, but as a bridge between who we are and who we were created to be, between confusion and clarity, between pain and redemption. This moral law that lives within us is not just a rule. It is a reminder of who our Creator is, and that we were made to live with Him. And maybe, just maybe, you are feeling this compass turn inside you now, pointing, calling, inviting. And that in itself says a lot. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. I really want to know who is feeling this call with me. And perhaps that's exactly what confuses us so much today. We live in a world where everything seems relative, where right and wrong have become almost a matter of opinion, where old values are seen as outdated, and any attempt to talk about good and evil can be quickly silenced by voices that say, to each their own truth. But is that really so? Is it possible to live like this, as if everything were fluid, changeable, and disconnected from a deeper foundation? C.S. Lewis believed not, and he dared to say this at a time when this idea was already unpopular. For him, the existence of a universal moral law was as evident as the air we breathe, not because it was imposed from outside, but because it already pulsates within us. Because somewhere in the soul we know that there are things that should not be done. We know that hurting others unfairly is not just inconvenient, but wrong. We know that protecting, welcoming, helping are good things in themselves, even when they bring us no advantage. And have you ever felt that? Have you ever found yourself feeling a deep discomfort in the face of something you saw? Something that didn't affect you directly. The spill stirred something deep inside you.
Like when someone is publicly humiliated, or when a defenseless animal is mistreated, or when a child cries and no one cares. These reactions don't come out of nowhere. They are not a product of culture, upbringing, or societal rules. They come from something older, deeper,
something that was already in us before we even knew how to name it. And this is where the beauty and the mystery of what Lewis called forgotten morality lies. But the most curious thing of all is that even while surrounded by examples of this inner compass, we often prefer to ignore it. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of pride, or because we don't know how to deal with what this moral conscience demands of us. Because if a law exists, then maybe a legislator also exists. And facing that is a big step, transformative, even frightening. Now, let me give you a real invitation. If at any point in this video you felt that this makes sense, if something inside you reacted, even discreetly, I invite you to leave a comment below. It can be as simple, "I felt that too," or a story of your own, a memory, a question. Because it is these exchanges that make this place alive. And more than not, it is your comments that fuel this channel, that show me that this message is finding open hearts, reflective minds, people who are not afraid to think more deeply. If you are still here, it is because something held you. So take this moment and like the video, not for the algorithm, but because it helps to spread this conversation to others who are also seeking meaning in the midst of the chaos. And of course, if this type of reflection touches you, if Lewis's voice echoes in you as it echoes in me, if this kind of content provokes you to think louder and deeper, subscribe to the channel, because this is only the first part of a much bigger journey. Here we will explore deep topics without fear of complexity. We will look within, yes, but also upward, and understand that our morality is not just the human construct, but perhaps a signature of the divine within us. So stay with me, because what comes next might surprise you even more. And perhaps as you listen to these words, you're remembering moments when something inside you lit up like a silent signal. Maybe you were seeing someone mistreat a child, or when you witnessed an injustice that no one around seemed to notice, but you felt as if something was screaming inside. An impulse that was not taught by rules nor imposed by laws, just felt deeply. This is the kind of thing C.S. Lewis would call the signature of God within us. An invisible but unmistakable mark, a silent compass that points to a higher direction. And if you've made it this far, maybe this conversation is touching something inside.
Maybe you've had experiences that also defy easy explanations. Moments when you couldn't say why, but just simply knew. You knew that was right. You knew that was wrong. You knew it wasn't just about opinion or culture. It was deeper. So if this topic makes sense to you, if at some point this idea of an invisible moral law has awakened something in your heart, share it with me here in the comments. Tell me, have you ever felt this? Have you ever been in a situation where your conscience spoke louder than everything around you? Your story can help other people see what might still be dormant inside them. It can create real connections, strengthen this community that is being born here, united by this search for meaning, truth, and faith. And if you are enjoying this conversation, if this reflection is opening your eyes in some way, leave a like on this video. This is not just a symbolic gesture. It's what allows this message to reach more people, for the algorithm to understand that this content matters. It's like extending a hand so that others can find this same path of light. And of course, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now, because this is just the beginning of a much bigger journey. Here we will continue exploring these forgotten truths, revealing the invisible, listening to the gentle voice of eternity within every day. Your subscription is what allows us to continue to build, to grow together. And so, take a deep breath.
because what comes next might change the way you see not only the world, but yourself. If you've made it this far, truly, thank you for walking this conversation with me. It's special to know that there is someone on the other side reflecting with me, feeling every word as I've felt it when I brought this to you. If this content made sense, if it touched something inside you, if this idea of the morality that lives in us made you see something more clearly, then subscribe to the channel here. Because that is exactly what we will continue to do here, unveiling the invisible, listening to what many times the world teaches us to silence. Leave it like too, not just for the video, but for this connection we built. This shows that it's worth continuing to create this kind of content, which brings meaning, faith, and reflection in such a noisy world. And tell me in the comments with the phrase, "This message was for me." I want to know who stayed until the end, who felt it along the way. Your comments help form this community of people who think, feel, and search for something greater. There's a video here on the side that complements exactly this topic. Click and continue with me over.
Let's go deeper together.